I'm always intrigued when I see these names. I'm always intrigued where people are. Some names I certainly know and recognise. I think I'll just give a couple more minutes to allow people to come in, and then we can get started. So just to say, Scarlett, who is part of the Fashion Network, has just dropped in to the chat feature details around how you go about leaving questions, and also our post-networking event that will happen directly afterwards. So if anyone needs the link, she'll be posting that shortly. And I think I will crack on because there's nothing worse than an awkward silence. Hello and welcome everyone to this inspirational learning event hosted by the Fashion Network. The focus of the conversation today is around individual journeys in the world of business. Before I open the conversation, a couple of things that I wanted to run through. I'd like to firstly thank our partners in the event, Brewin, Dolphin, who are wealth managers and support business owners when it comes to exiting their business. If you're watching this on YouTube at a later date, please click the like and subscribe. I've always wanted to do that. If you're watching this live, then do use the chat feature for any questions. If you'd like to speak to our panel during the talk, please raise your hand. And also there'll be an opportunity to sort of ask the question in person if you want in around 40 minutes. Also, we have a post networking session. If you haven't received the link, then obviously our hosts will share that in the chat feature. So I'm not sure how a virtual networking session is going to work, but I'm excited. So joining us today, the Fashion Network have pulled together 4 fantastic, or 5, including me, experts and leaders in business and fashion. I'd love to go around the table so you can introduce yourselves to the audience. So I'm going to start with Charlotte. I know Charlotte had a few problems before, so let's wait and we will go then to Wendy. Hey, Wendy.
Hi. So I'm Wendy Hallett, and I own Hallett Retail Services and Hallett Retail Logistics. And I set the business up in 1999, so it's now been going around 21 years. And very, very much in a nutshell, it's we work with lots of different brands across different categories, and we take those brands as a portfolio to a number of different retailers.
I think what's really amazing about your business evolution, essentially, is how you started very much in the retail concession, and then you've kind of gone through right to, I guess, the logistics, and it's become this end-to-end solution. Were you a kind of, was it the landscape at that time? Were you a unique proposition in the way that you were building this sort of retail concession and logistics sort of all under one roof?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I started the business in the first place, the model was quite unique, and we were the only people using a concession format to take a group of brands to the retailers. So we were providing a service to the brands, but also to the retailers. And then what we found is, as more and more online developed, that we had to then go into that space, so that while we were providing the brands a route to market in stores, we needed to provide them a route to market online as well. And really bought the logistics business because we couldn't find what we needed to support us, and were frustrated with the service we were getting. And the easiest way, and in some ways it wasn't a major decision, it was just by buying our own business in that area, we then were able to expand and do this, as you say, end to end. We can provide anything then for the brand, whether it's stores or warehousing.
I guess it's the perfect example of, you know, how we build and how we evolve in business by building out what we know we need but is not available. So thank you for sharing with us your sort of background there. Charlotte, I can see you're back.
Apologies for the technical issues right at the beginning there. Yes, I'm back. Afternoon, everyone. So I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Charlotte Tattersall. I'm a chartered financial planner at Brewin Dolphin. Brewin Dolphin is quite a large company. It's one that it's quite a big company that nobody knows of. We don't actually do an awful lot of marketing. A lot of our clients come through referrals and word of mouth, which is fantastic. But we've got about 30 offices around the country. Just a bit about myself as well. So I've been qualified for about 11 years. When I fully qualified in 2014, I actually qualified at the top of my class, so the top marks out of 600 other advisors that year. And my role is really to give advice to individuals around whether that's just general financial planning, pensions, investments, and typically I work with quite a few entrepreneurs, business owners, to help them on the journey of making sure that they're financially secure independently of the business, and also at that exit phase as well.
Yeah, because I do think that this is often an underthought through area of the founder's journey in terms of that long-term financial planning. I guess I'd just love to know, why do you think that is? And have you seen a shift over the last 10 years? And are founders more financially savvy today because ultimately they know where they want to be and what they want to achieve?
Yeah, I think it is quite typical to meet entrepreneurs and business owners where, you know, as you set up a company, the focus tends to be on the business and making sure that the business succeeds and is growing. And I think we're all guilty of putting our own personal life admin at the bottom of the list. And it's one of those things you might not necessarily get around to it. I think as well, we often hear people saying, you know, oh, I can't afford to put into a pension, or I'm not wealthy enough to start investing. And actually, I think starting with just something is the key message that I would get across to people. And I think people are quite aware of sort of gender pay gap, but another area that is the pension gap as well, which is, so women there's a gap of about 33 to 40% between genders on pensions as well. So it's getting female founders especially to be more wary of those sort of gaps and start earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are starting to see more people starting to think about it, reach out, have those conversations, which is really good, really positive news.
Yeah, fantastic. And then Jordan, hi.
Hi Sarah, lovely to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Yeah, it'd be great if you could just sort of give an overview of your background and what you do at Dargue Associates.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. So I'm founding director of Dargue Associates, and we were established to really support the early stage business ecosystem. We found that we initially started as a recruitment company, basically, and we found that recruitment was quite expensive for a lot of businesses, and there isn't often a bespoke offering. So we started as a consultancy rather than a typical high street recruiter, where we would work with early stage businesses to start and consider what the skills need to be when starting to grow and scale an organization. And also working with them, not just about giving them, the actual candidates and the skills and the expertise in the business, but actually setting them up so they can actually go off and recruit themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So working with them on that full process. My experience personally cuts across a number of different sectors. And it became quite apparent that, from a growth perspective, people and recruitment is one thing, but actually they need tools, they need to know how to market, they need to know how to commercialize. So we became really a one-stop shop as a growth consultant for businesses, again, who are operating in, the very early tech landscape. We operate right across the north as well. We do have clients as far down as Kent and Bedfordshire, but we do predominantly focus on the north as a whole. And we've got a real appetite to support women in business as well. Yeah. And that's really started to lead me to actually investing and to also taking NED roles within those organisations as well.
I think what I found really about about Dargue Associates is, as you say, it's the cross-functional channels that are so essential in this startup, such as talent. I mean, that is, and when you're a new business owner and you're looking to scale, sometimes, there's the fear of affordability and when's the right time to bring in sort of experts in their fields. And what would you say, what's the difference today versus 5 years ago in terms of startups and how they're approaching the what you tend to be supporting them most with?
Yeah, absolutely. So with us, Sarah, we've seen the landscape evolve. I mean, when I first started out, the startup landscape wasn't as big as what it is now. And we weren't seeing as many companies actually being established. We're seeing obviously triple that now. And I think over the course of that as well, is we've absolutely found that, there's a lot of people who might be technical focused but don't have the commercial skills in the business, and we found that a lot more recently, where not only have we had founders of organizations that have the technical ability, they've also come with some of more of that commercial aspect about them. And I think that's evolved, but actually there's tougher competition out there for businesses now. And I think that's where we've really had to adapt to helping businesses with what they need and what they currently need at that time, and basically taking them through a full process, really, right from inception all the way through to getting to a point where they're scalable and sustainable as a business as well. One of the key things as well as evolved over time is accessing finance. One of the biggest things that an organization, an early stage organization, needs is finance as well. And I think, we, particularly in the north, we don't have the luxury of there being a lot of finance available. We tend to reach out to our southern regions to raise investment for early stage businesses. And one of the things I think we've seen more recently, as there's been a number of initiatives to support early stage businesses that have come to the forefront. And I would say, particularly in the last 18 months, given the circumstances of everything that's been going on over the last 18 months, the ability to find finance for companies has been a little bit easier, given all of the additional support through grant initiatives and debt funding as well. So I think, in answer to your question there, Sarah, I think it has evolved, the landscape has evolved, competition has got tougher, but there is more access and support available for organisations who are looking to set out, and particularly for female entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, which is all, and then Jodie, who's an investor at Charlie Oscar. I've got to say, I do love that business name.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, nice to meet everyone. I'm Jodie. So I bet a lot of people haven't heard of Charlie Oscar, but we launched beginning of this year. Big part of our story comes from one of our co-founders, who's James Connolly. So he started a business called Fetch back in sort of 2008, which was a mobile focused marketing agency. So he really focused on how to market app-based businesses, sort of Uber, Facebook, Apple Music, and then took the business and was helping more sort of e-commerce based businesses in the UK and US scale, but sort of really large clients like Lululemon. And he sold the business a few years ago to Dentsu and met our other co-founder, Elliot Richmond, who's a really active angel investor. And they sort of put their heads together and saw a real gap in the market for, I guess, one, a fund that was really just focused on consumer brands and digitally native consumer brands. We felt there was sort of a lack of focus on that in the UK. And secondly, sort of capital that really added value. So they sort of repurposed what existed at Fetch in terms of really using data science to scale brands. So we invest in brands, and then the brands get access to our data science platform and our in-house data science team to really sort of help brands, I guess, unlock the data that they already have. And we're finding that I think a lot of founders, especially with now sort of the iOS updates, Facebook becoming more expensive, it's becoming a lot more about, how do you leverage your own data and really take the insights from that to scale the business. So yeah, I'm a Charlie Oscar and really loving it so far.
Amazing. So you're on the front line really when talking to new startups and seeing sort of trends coming through. Thank you. So we're going to go into the main sort of questions, and then we will, depend on how we do, we'll move to Q&As and audience questions as well. So Jodie and Jordan, I just want to kind of kick off. I hate talking about pre-COVID. I hate that phrase, so I'm going to refer to it as pre-2020. What would you say because I'm a true believer that with challenge comes opportunity. So what have been the biggest challenges for startups, but actually what has then evolved to become the biggest opportunity in terms of how you evolve and how you launch your business in today's marketplace landscape?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. So I think for myself, what we've seen is obviously pre-2020. I think we saw that the landscape was growing and developing, and then obviously when certain things occurred, it seems as if it was very much, there's been an absolute shock here. What do we do? And I think that was a real challenge for a lot of companies, a lot of startups, particularly those type of companies who had clinical trials ongoing and really needed support from external resources and universities and the likes of, so real sort of life sciences, med tech type companies started to struggle because they couldn't get the clinical trials done quick enough, they couldn't get the right research and development trials done quick enough, and we saw that as being a real challenge for a lot of early stage companies. However, what we did see is resilience, and I think we saw that in an awful lot of founders. They were quite quickly able to pivot and look at actually what was important for that business during that time, and actually how do they make use of what they've got in the business as well. And I think with companies particularly who are on the cusp of actually just starting to generate revenues as well, we started to see a lot of companies start to pivot and look at what they had internally, what they had in terms of innovation that could actually support what was happening in the current landscape as well. I think another great thing that's come out of it, and we were just chatting about this before we came live on air, was about obviously the virtual landscape. And actually, for me personally, I've seen a huge uplift in terms of business activity really take off purely because of the fact that we are operating virtually. And as I mentioned in my earlier response, the investment landscape has really evolved. I work as a director as well as at North Invest, and we used to have virtual pitching events physical pitching events where we would showcase early stage companies to investors. We pivoted very quickly with that and took all of those events on virtual in the virtual landscape, and it actually found that we were able to support more companies reach their investment cut point purely because of the fact that they were achieving investment from differing locations, because we could do that virtually, and we were able to build out bigger investment networks as well to support those startups. So I think, to round the answer off, we saw an awful lot of challenges, but for me, the opportunities were much greater. And I think people have responded extremely well. I mean, for me, a company that was very early stage and it's now progressed during that period, for me, is an absolute solid business.
Yeah, totally. I guess for you as well, on a similar question, but because obviously you launched at the beginning of this year. So, so you've kind of, were you in a pre-launch mode as well, that you also had to be agile and work through?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we've just seen positives from it, from perspective of being a new fund, because I think so as Jordan mentioned, I think just the access to more founders, being able to take so many more calls with founders regardless of location, getting sort of so many more conversations going was a real plus. And I think in the sort of brands, digitally native brand space, we've seen the reverse, where there's a lot of businesses that have really taken off because consumer behaviors has changed, and now people have, where they may have bought products in the supermarkets, they're now all switching online. I think a lot of the challenge that some of the businesses we've spoken to is proving to investors that that's going to stay, and it's going to be a sticky behavior. So I think the challenge for a lot of the brands we speak to is retention, and really making sure that they sort of hold on to those customers that they've acquired during the pandemic. Some of the growth's been exceptional, but there's a bit of uncertainty around how long they can keep those customers.
Yeah. Would you say the profile of investors, of your typical investor, has changed and maybe is younger as well?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's as a woman going into investing at sort of my age, I think I found it interesting, because I think in the UK, I found a lot of pushback when I was applying for roles with sort of my age and experience. I found the UK landscape tends to be sort of a slightly older demographic versus myself. I find myself quite a young investor, whereas in the US market, which is where I sort of started my career, I think it was a much younger group of people in that space. So I think the UK is probably a slightly older demographic, interestingly.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the sort of move towards the increase in tech startups that's sort of generating that. I mean, there have been a lot of successful exits for young, well, not your typical profile of business or CEO who have then gone and started their own portfolio, such as the guys from Innocent Juices.
Yeah, definitely.
And Wendy, and I'm going to get on to your sort of story is I'm just in awe. But you have, particularly within the fulfillment sector, you have been very much at the forefront of that impact in consumer changes with the digital acceleration. But even before that, when we had, when it was, the introduction of e-tail, as it were, which has seemed so kind of ancient now. How did you how did you sort of adjust to that and pivot quickly? Did you see it coming down the tracks? Were you already sort of going in that direction because you had that intuitive retail sort of mindset?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting, and trying to sort of remember back to how that happened. I think it was probably a combination of both, that we were still doing well in stores, and we were developing into new categories and new types of stores. So we started off in department stores, and then we started trading with fashion multiples, which meant we could scale much quicker because we weren't shop fitting, we weren't staffing those stores, but we were putting the brands in on relatively large space into lots of stores. So that side of the business was still doing well. But what we were seeing is some more competition come in, because when I first set up, there was nobody really doing what we were doing. And then what happened is some of the brands that started with us then were really growing. So we're in a more of a position to be able to do things, if you like, without our support and our expertise. So I think that we saw it as we needed to move on and get into that space fast, because otherwise we're going to be left.
Oh, have we lost Wendy? Oh, well, I'm sure Wendy will come back. These are the joys of, oh, can you hear us now, Wendy?
I can, yes. Could you hear me?
We lost you just for a moment there. But yeah, it was when you were talking about how some of your partners were growing as well, and so you were, yeah.
Yes. So it's important that we offered something new and different that they weren't able to do. So that, and then we were working with a warehouse company, which we then offered to buy, so that we had much more control over how we set it all up. And the one key thing, and this is something that we are focusing again on now, was that if you are able to do the marketplace, so where the retailer allows you to pick, pack and dispatch direct to the customer, you can operate with one pot of stock. And that sort of model is really good, because they only have to put one lot of stock in our warehouse, and then we can service a number of different retailers' websites. So that, if you like, it was the same thing we were doing in stores, but we just replicated it online. And you can add new into that. Everybody's on the same IT system with us. So once we've integrated with a retailer, then our brands can then slot in pretty easily to that retailer, whether it's in stores or online.
And I mean, you kind of entered therefore, when you made the acquisition of the fulfillment center, you entered into a really male-dominated sector. What was sort of, did you encounter any of the sort of the normal challenges that often we can hear about, or did you find actually it was a great pivotal turning point for the business, that then you just kind of you accelerated and left everyone behind? And
it's really interesting, because I think as you go through your journey, you forget certain things, and just that question has really reminded me.
I've not triggered you, have I?
No, you're not triggered me, but it's a really interesting question, because I think for me it was around culture. So I had built my own business up from me being a consultant to coming up with this idea, and then started to employ people and build, if you like, a business to a degree that well, not even to a degree, I loved it. It was my culture. I was always very careful to employ the best person for the role, but we were very representative, if you like, of women. So there were a lot of strong women within my concession side of the business. And when we bought and we took over the teams at the warehouse, it was quite male.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that it was male, but the way people had been taught to deal with things and to speak to each other and to value each other was not the culture that I had in the concessions business. So and it's really interesting looking back that yes, some people left, but one or two of the people that at first, because I'm walking around the warehouse floor being called love, darling, and and comments behind the back, because my husband's in the business as well, or who wears the trousers, and all of those things did happen. But we still have a number of people employed by us now in that warehouse, and they are the way they are is now very different from when we bought that business.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's really important when you take over a business, not, if you like, just to assume, you know, they acted the way they acted because that's the way they were being treated and how the bosses acted.
Yeah, and they often sort of follow the example of the leaders. And I imagine with your change and your focus from a culture perspective, that itself must have led to, you know, great retention as well. Because that's another key part of business that we often overlook. It's that retention of key personnel, key staff members, that therefore building that strong culture. It's not a given, you know. It's quite a hard thing to really build a genuine caring culture of team players.
Yeah, and it feels more like it is two separate businesses, but it now feels more like one business.
Nice.
With the way it's both of them are run. Yeah,
fantastic.
With the same, you know, with the same standards and expectations for both of them.
And Charlotte, so I'm going to come to you as my financial advisor, and we're going to assume that I've built a business. Well, I have, but on this occasion, I built a business and I've hit my key targets. I've scaled to profitability. Now I want to exit. How do I start the process, and when is the right time to exit?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like I said, we work with quite a few entrepreneurs and business owners. And I think the place to start really is thinking about what's next. You know, once you exit the business, what are your goals? Is it a case of just getting to that magic number so that you can effectively stop working? Because we have people in that group, that category, that want to build a business up, sell it, and then that's it, that's them done. Other types of people, they want to go on to the next thing. It's the next adventure, the next challenge. So I would say start with what your objectives are, and also get advice early. So don't just think, oh, okay, I'm exiting, I'm going to have this amount of money, I therefore need some financial advice. Do it a few years early, because we've actually had people come to us saying that they want to do work for another few years to get a certain valuation on their business. And sometimes we can actually show them that they don't need that figure they had in their head, and actually that magic number for them is a lot lower, and actually they can do what they wanted a lot sooner. So come and get advice a lot earlier. Have a conversation with someone, pick up the phone. And the other thing is as well, if you start earlier, start speaking to a financial advisor early on as well. If you are planning an exit in 3-4 years, whatever it might be, they can actually structure and put things in place so that we can use allowances you've got available in those few years while you're still working and able to draw money out of the company prior to that exit. So really get someone involved early in the process. And whilst as a company we deal with individuals and help them with their individual finances, we don't get involved in the sort of the valuation of businesses. We do have various contacts that we can put people in touch with. So it's very much a team approach of having those professional advisors that you trust to help you through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And we caught up before the event, and I loved when you were giving me a bit of background about your journey before starting in your current role. And you were saying that you decided to be unapologetically intelligent, which I just love.
Yeah,
I think that's just like such a brilliant sort of statement. Would you say that as a society, we've kind of broken through that taboo that we often had about talking about wealth, investments, and ultimately being confident in our success? Are founders sort of and business leaders today more open than maybe 10 years ago, or are we still just as Brits too bloody polite and embarrassed to talk about wealth and ambitions and all these sort of things? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're definitely getting there. We're making progress, but I think, like we were saying before, is we're still very British about it, in terms of it's, if you talk about wealth and your investments, or maybe, you know, what you've got in the background in terms of finances, it's almost can be seen as bragging. So I think there's still this taboo about actually talking about these things that we should be fairly open about and talking among peers about. And I think, you know, it's been this, it has definitely evolved. We're getting more people starting to have more open conversations, come to us earlier to have those thoughts and see if they're doing the right things. But if you think back, you know, we've never had, you know, I was never brought up understanding, you know, finances, money, how to budget, you know, debt, simple things like that, and that was never taught in schools at all. But we're starting to see a shift of a push to have that education for young people. And we're starting to see companies as well supporting schools and younger people to actually start thinking about this. So I think we are seeing a shift, but we've still got some way to go. Yeah. So Wealthy Her did a report last year. They surveyed over 2,000 people, and about 2/3 of women still didn't feel financially savvy. And so we've still got a long way to go. And it's about educating yourself, reaching out to people, talking to your friends and family about these things. Yeah. I mean, as a financial advisor, I think we've said it before, that, you know, there's never a cost for an initial chat to see if you're doing, maybe if there's more that you could think about. So I would say reach out, pick up the phone. There's me and my team at Brewin in Manchester that are more than happy to have a conversation with anyone to say, you know, have you thought about this, or, you know, put these things in place. You know, if we can't necessarily help you as a client right now, we can at least point you in the right direction. And I think that's key.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, and I think you said at the beginning, as founders, we often we put ourselves last, personally. And when you're tied up with the business, you need to make sure that there are solid, you know, foundations, and that you have thought ahead, because, you know, you can't assume that someone else is going to think in any exit position or any valuation, or who knows what comes around the corner. It's so important to have that fallback and take responsibility. And I think we have to, you know, we have to sort of shake away this fear of having conversations about investments and having them with friends, and not worrying what people think if it's seen as bragging, or it's just not. It's, you know, I think it's a really interesting change in society as well, which is, you know, probably is welcome without question. And Jordan, so from your side, what sort of, particularly within your role and the particular business leaders and founders that you've worked with, what in your mind, what are the great skills to becoming a business leader in today's world, especially when it's so fluid and it's so changeable, and, you know, how do people overcome the fear element, which can often stop people from launching a business? And I'm sure, Wendy, you might have some great insight on that. You know, I always say entrepreneurialism is a mindset, because, you know, there are never any guarantees. It's just got to be down to complete mindset and self-belief and discipline. What's been your most your most sort of the greatest lessons in terms of these types of personalities?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, Sarah. I think it's all, you know, it's not, you can't learn to be an entrepreneur. You're either are or you're not, so to speak. And going back to what Charlotte's just mentioned there, I think that comes at a very young age, to be honest. I think that, you know, me personally, I could have gone down the academic route, and I actually went to university, but instead I really wanted to make money rather than actually just spend the money from student loans. And it was very quick that I wanted to set up something where I knew I was going to make money, because I didn't want to get into debt to then have to pay back a student loan, basically. And I think that mindset was always there for me personally, because I saw that from my parents. My parents had their own business, and I think that was just the way that I personally was brought up. But what I'm seeing, obviously, from other entrepreneurs is very similar. You know, it starts at a very young age where you have that mannerism about you. But I'm going to use that word again. Resilience is absolutely key. because whenever you're trying to achieve something in life, you're going to come across a lot of barriers and a lot of hurdles. And I think somebody who's extremely resilient and focused and ambitious and thick-skinned as well. I mean, you know, let's look at a woman in business, for example. We've got to jump through a lot more hurdles. You know, we really do. We do struggle. And I think, you know, we often have, we're often not looked in the same light. And I think that does have an effect on a lot of people. So I think that we all, you know, for an entrepreneur particularly has to sort of have that, you know, that mindset where they will set out to achieve something, and if that doesn't work, they'll definitely consider something else, or they'll keep going as well. You know, it's all about either keep going or pivoting, and I think that's really, really important as an entrepreneur. I think we're seeing lots of different skills coming through, and when I first started in like the software tech sector as well, there wasn't many women who were coming through the university channels or the school channels wanting to get into software development, for example, or those more technical based roles. That was obviously over 10 years ago. Now we're seeing so many women coming through those routes. So I genuinely think that, you know, setting out, you know, as an entrepreneur, and is, for me, I think there's a lot more options for anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur now, and also a lot more support as well. But I do think that, you know, you've got to have such thick skin. You really, really do, because you're going to come across challenges every day. And I think one of the key things as well is actually having a network around you. Even if you're a sole founder, be part of some form of network, whether that is a business-based network or a personal network, or, you know, just somebody who at the end of the day you can have that steam effect where you have a conversation and you can, you know, talk about maybe some of the issues that you're having, and other people can help you overcome them. But it's not easy. It really isn't easy. But we're seeing people now more and more so wanting to become entrepreneurs, and particularly women as well.
Yeah, I always say to people, you know, be very careful who you take your counsel from, because there will always be the naysayers, which is great, because, you know, you can't go through life assuming everything's going to pan out the way you want. But there will always be people who give you their opinion based on how they, you know, based on their fears or their boundaries or where they're willing to push things and take a risk. And sometimes there has to be an element of risk when you go, well, you know, there is naturally an element of risk by being an entrepreneur and wanting to start a business, goes without saying. And so always judge, you know, be very careful who you are talking to, because, you know, the most demoralizing thing is if you're just surrounded by people who are just, you know, sucking the enthusiasm out of your little sort of baby that you're trying to incubate, and all you want to do is feed it with kind of like positivity and, you know, the sort of the will to sort of grow. And I think that says more about other people's mindsets and, you know, how they approach. And I think that's also, you know, quite a British thing, where we don't want to be seen as bragging, because we don't want to make anyone else feel uncomfortable, which is so a very British sort of position.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of founders also get a lot of advice from people as well, that a lot of people will give them advice and support. And one of the things that we always recommend a founder do is take the bits of information that they can relate to and actually feels right for them as well, because they've got to feel comfortable and confident in their vision and their strategy that they're outlining. And I think it's really important that, you know, you can't take on board everything that everybody's telling you. You only take snippets that can relate to it. And also you build relationships with those like-minded people as well, because that's where you're going to start to iron out maybe some of those people who do take away some of that energy.
I would say any founder, female founder out there, needs kind of a girl squad made up of sort of you four, because I think you would cover all bases. And Jodie, I'd love to hear, you must see so many pitches of your time, and landing the pitch is by no, an investor sort of deck is by no means an obvious task. What would you say are the best things to to focus on when you're building your deck, and what have been the things that you see quite frequently, but actually you should avoid? Because I think there's a real art to it, and you can pay people small fortunes to build your investor deck because it's that important in the journey. But doing it from home, what would be your sort of recommendations?
Yeah, of course. I think for me, the biggest thing is getting people's attention really early on, and some of the best decks I've read start with sort of a personal story and the reason why sort of that product or that brand was born, from a personal perspective. Because I think that it's much easier to remember people and their own stories versus just the metrics or just looking at the product. So people that have got sort of strong stories of how their product was born, and making it relatable, and really setting up the problem that they saw in the market and how that product is filling that problem. So I think we see a lot of brands popping up that aren't really solving key problems, or they struggle to sort of really articulate that well. And the other thing I'd say that I always have to go and ask for sort of after reading a pitch deck, and I'd love to see it more in pitch decks, it's just more KPIs, especially on the brand side around sort of loyalty, retention, community. And I think something that I've noticed in the sort of consumer space is women are very good about building community first and then selling the product in. Men are sort of typically less good at that. And I think now we're seeing in the brand space, people are more interested in communities and sort of brand love. So I think the more founders that can show that they've built that community and how engaged that community is, really comes across well.
Yeah, I'm just looking through, we've just got a question actually that I just think might fit in specifically on what you're talking about. I've got AA who says, how do you narrow down to focus on one area when you have few ideas running simultaneously? And I think that's the problem, isn't it? It's when you kind of spread, when you have too many ideas running simultaneously, it's kind of giving any one of those particularly enough attention to flourish and grow. What would you say?
Is this in terms of, just to get the question right, the sort of areas of the business of sort of what to focus on?
I think from what I understand, AA, maybe you can add to it, but I think this is more in terms of narrowing down the focus to one area of business, or are you talking about one? Maybe AA, maybe you can just give us a little, yeah, she says yes. So okay. Yeah, so you've got multiple ideas.
Yeah, I'd say, I think for me, this is my personal opinion, some investors might disagree, but I think one thing we're seeing is there's just so much more competition in the space. So then I would much rather, and I think a lot of other investors in the space I speak to would also agree, rather see a smaller community that are really highly engaged and really love your product, rather than a bigger community that feels a bit sort of meh about it. It's the only word I can think of. So I think that's, for me, showing really strong retention, really strong engagement in the brand, for me is the sort of the area to really focus on for me.
Yeah. Thank you. And Wendy, so firstly, Wendy received an MBE for services to diversity and fashion in 2013. And this is the most incredible part. You have not taken a dime of investment since you launched, which is bloody incredible. And you started your business with initially £1,000 investment. Firstly, I love you. You're my girl crush. How did you do this? And also, do you have an exit plan? And if so, do you need someone to go on holiday with?
I think if I give a flavour perhaps of why I set up the business, I think that would probably explain then perhaps why I didn't go out and look for investment and how I did, what happened was grow it organically. So as we needed money, we had it in the business. So I had two, and I think this story will resonate with a number of mothers with small children. So at the time I had two small children, and I was in a job share working at Arcadia. I'd loved doing all the stuff at work for Topshop since I came out of uni, and had not, although I look back at my school days and realise now there were elements of entrepreneurship that I did, at the time it had never crossed my mind that I wanted to set up my own business. But what happened, and that was 21 years ago, is that I then got made redundant, and I could not get any part-time work at the level I was used to operating. And I've never been so, I remember being really frustrated, and recruitment companies wouldn't touch me. They said, no, if you don't want to work full time, we're not interested in pitching you to retailers. And so I then decided I didn't want to, if you like, sacrifice. I wanted to work at a certain level, but I also wanted to be the mum that I wanted to be. And so I then set up as a consultant. And then had that idea of pulling these brands together. They initially were quite a few of the concessions that I knew because I'd worked with Topshop. So a number of these companies have been trading with Topshop. And I went and had a chat with the external business manager at Debenhams. It's so embarrassing now when I think what I did. I went in and had a cup of coffee, no business plan, no, literally no nothing, not even projections or anything. And I said, give me some space in one of your stores and I'll bring some stock in and I'll employ somebody to run it. And so I suppose what happened is that I never needed the investment. I think, if I remember rightly, Debenhams paid for the shop fit, etc. And also I was doing it on my own. I didn't, we were a young couple. We didn't really have money to invest, and I hadn't got friends or family that were going to invest. So I sort of literally just didn't even think about going after investment. And then we grew it, and we were able to, as I say, come up with a model where we weren't buying stock. Are you okay? You've lost me? No?
No, we got you.
You got me? Okay. And yes, so we weren't buying the stock. So the brands always own the stock, and the retailer was providing, for argument's sake, the fixtures. And I was able to grow the business without having to go outside and get money. And then I think the more we did it that way, the more we did not want other people involved in the business. And I think, if I remember rightly, it was about 10 years ago, it just was getting so big and very sort of stressful. And I was at the point where I didn't, I still had children of a certain age, and I didn't really want to work full time. And it was at that point that my husband came in on board with me. He's more finance and tech savvy than I am. And the partnership then just worked really, really well.
Yeah.
And we just decided, no, we like owning 100% of this. And we were able to do what we wanted to do without having to investment. So I think, that's how it happened. It was because I think it was never meant to be this business that it became.
Don't you find that sometimes there are some people where it's planned, and it's what they do it, and it's always been the plan of their life plan, and there are others where it evolves and it blossoms. But then when you're in that sort of where there is no plan, you must also have to be grow this incredible resilience to deal with unknown and uncertainty. How have you developed that part of you, or was it always there? Or
I think it's interesting. I think, and I'm very open about some of the challenges when I was much younger. So I lost my mum when I was 7 to cancer, and I was brought up in an all-male household. My father brought me up with my 2 brothers, and at times that was quite challenging. and I had to balance between ensuring my voice was heard, ensuring that I wasn't the one left doing all the women's work, while also, I think, being a bit of a peacemaker as well. So I think, looking back, that for horrible reasons, that made me quite independent and quite resilient from a very early age. And then I think that, and then I myself had cancer. I don't want to make this too much, these are all the things that have been thrown at me, but I also then had cancer while my children were still quite young. So I think that sometimes some of the business challenges that were thrown at me in relation to what I had to cope with, I was running the business and having chemo for 6 months and 2 small children. I think really then when you get thrown, and don't get me wrong, COVID has really been extremely challenging for my business. I think you do remember that you've actually got through some worse things. So therefore, we will come out of this.
It's applying that. Business will always be personal when you're a founder and when it's your own business, but you always have to put it into perspective, don't you, and understand. And I think, we all as humans go through these challenges and sort of these terrible challenges in life, but that is part of every human's journey. That's how we grow, and sometimes stepping back and putting a little bit of space between the problem and yourself, so you're not in the thick of it. If there's a business problem, is a really important skill to have, particularly, considering the 18 months that we've come out of. I've been
much more honest though through this last 18 months about when I have struggled. Because I think that's the other thing. Well, the one thing that this time has taught me is I didn't have to keep it covered up. So that the times, being that inspirational leader to the business and always being I'm okay and trying to lead, that got really difficult at times. So I've been more honest these last 18 months when I've struggled, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's really true. We have to be, to share when we're not feeling great, because actually it helps empower everyone else in the sense of making people understand that it's normal to have these feelings, and actually the lesson is how to get yourself through it. What's the survival technique? Is it going for a walk in nature? Is it a swim? But trying to understand what those are really important. We are at the top of the hour. I was going to ask a really funny closing question, but we're out of time, and it was but anyway, it's probably was more funny for me than it was for anyone else. So probably a lucky escape there for everyone. So the final message before we jump off this Zoom link and into networking mode: if you're a female founder and would like support with growing and scaling your business, or you're thinking about an exit, get in touch with the Fashion Network. They host The Balls You Can't Afford, a business forum that includes investors, non-execs, and other C-suite leaders. All that's left for me to say is thank you to the panel. You are amazing. And a major thanks to Brewin Dolphin for sponsoring the event. Have a great afternoon, everyone. See you on the other side, on the other networking. I'm keen to see how this networking virtual event. Oh, there we go. I was cut off with my prime. Is it?
So are we in the networking event, or do we have to come in somewhere different?
Basically, we'll share the link into the chat now. Again, and if you just leave this link and then click on the next link. Yeah, and that applies to all the audience as well. If anyone wants to join, there you go, there's a link. If anyone wants to join and speak to Sarah and Wendy face to face, they're more than welcome as well.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll see. Jordan, you can't join. You've got to go to another meeting, haven't you?
Yes, I've got to head to another meeting now.
Well, thank you so much for everything.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you, and lovely to meet everybody as well.
Take care, darling. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And just a reminder to everybody who's still here, if you click on that link in the chat box, you'll be able to join us in a meeting, face-to-face meeting with the panel and a few of the other guests. We will see you there shortly.